Welcome to the Paradox PT podcast, where we discuss all things physical therapy, rehabilitation, and clinical practice. My name is Leo Falzon. Today, Brando and I reflect on something called imposter syndrome, which is basically the feeling that you're a fraud or that you're not good enough and that all of your accomplishments are accidental. We chat about our experiences with it, some strategies that have helped us overcome it, and go out on some interesting tangents along the way. Without any further ado, here's my conversation with Brandon about imposter syndrome. So, Brando, the idea here, I wanted to talk to you about imposter syndrome because it's a term I see going around a lot on social media. It's it's a word that I don't think I'd heard until maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And I don't know really where it came from, but it's something that I feel like I've struggled with at times. And I honestly just wanted to get your take on it. So first of all, I thought I'd ask by getting your take on what you think imposter syndrome is. Like, how would you define it?
That's a great question. I shouldn't have Googled the actual definition. But prior to Googling, what would I say? I'd probably say you have this sensation in your own body that like you're a person that you don't think you either deserve to be or truly are. You know what I mean? And it's always, I think, in the interface of transferring knowledge from one person to the next. So, for you and I, clinically, we have all these patients who look up to us and trust our judgment and ask us questions. And we're playing this role of clinician that we've, never really played before. So we kind of get to that sense of, am I faking this? Is this real? Do I deserve to be here? Am I smart enough to be here? Or even what the hell do I even know about what's going on? What would you say?
Yeah, no, that resonates. I would say for me, like in a concise sentence, imposter syndrome is like the feeling that you're a fraud, maybe, or that you're not good enough, you don't deserve to be in your current position, whatever it is, and that maybe your accomplishments are accidental. There was a good quote. Do you know the author Neil Gaiman?
No, I
No.
don't.
Anyways, he gave a really good commencement speech at university, and he said, I have his quote here, it was, the first problem of any kind of even limited success is the unshakable conviction that you're getting away with something and that at any moment now they'll discover you. You know what I mean?
That's really nice. That's a really nice way to sum it up, isn't it?
Yeah. And so, it's an interesting thing because first of all, like I find it fascinating that we call everything a syndrome now. Because I don't know, I to some degree, that feeling like you're a fraud, like is that not just low self-confidence? You know?
Totally,
Like,
totally. Or maybe not even low self-confidence. Maybe it's just being like intellectually honest. You know what I mean? Like just like being internally honest of your skills, of your abilities, and even though you're being honest, it doesn't mean that you don't have those skills. It just you haven't quite realized that you do quite yet. You know what I mean? Like just you're not used to being in that type of position.
yeah.
Um, like for me, I've never really tried to portray myself as somebody I'm not, and I think that's important for reasons not only through physio but obviously through life. But I attribute that to maybe one of the reasons why like I grapple with this imposter syndrome from time to time, but it hasn't been something that has been particularly it hasn't overtook me in any type of capacity. Um,
Yeah.
so I don't think it's a remedy, but if you're honest to your ability and you convey yourself in such a way to others that match how you feel on the inside, like you're just being your authentic self, I think that's a way to dampen the effects of this imposter syndrome, but it doesn't solve it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm with you. I think, it's like it's useful to ask the question, like what's driving that feeling like you're not good enough? Because I think on one level, there's probably a lot of people who have this feeling like they're not good enough because they're actually not good enough and like they haven't put in the work to actually know what they're doing, So you have a genuine lack of expertise. And so then you feel like a fraud and like you are a fraud in that sense. But then I guess there's the issue where maybe you actually are an expert in an area and you still feel that imposter syndrome. And I think different people probably struggle with that to different extents. So, maybe for some people it's just a situational issue where they're new to something, they haven't gained genuine competence in it, and so they don't have confidence in themselves. And then on another level, it could be this underlying, you could see it as more of like a dispositional trait where some people just have a tougher time ever feeling like they belong, um, yeah.
Totally. And let's just talk about the latter for a second. Like, let's say you are an expert in one specific area of your practice, and for whatever reason, you just still feel that you're not this expert that people portray you to be. Is that a particularly bad trait to have? Like, I know it's not necessarily easy on the being, but it brings some sort of humility, and it also brings motivation to keep learning.
Yeah.
There's nothing worse than somebody who just feels like they've made it, they've accomplished everything they have to accomplish, they're the pro, everyone is coming to see me, I know everything, and you know what I mean? You never have to expand out of that. Um, what do you take on that?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that, like, if it really manifests in a sort of humility, like that's a positive thing. Like, you don't want to be like, you don't want to be arrogant, about your level of expertise, and to like feel like you're, so great and you have nothing more to learn, because I think humility is beneficial. Like, it drives you to keep getting better. And I guess the question is, like, when the opposite end of the spectrum fills over into you feeling like pathologically like, you don't deserve to be there, and then maybe people can kind of get, because I think people can detect arrogance really, really easily, but they can also detect somebody who's like desperately out of their depth. You know what I mean? So I think you kind of want to be somewhere on that tightrope.
It's true.
Yeah, so like, I think you should never be like, if you never feel a little bit of that imposter syndrome, then it probably means you're not doing things that are outside of your current competence level, which means
It's
you're
true.
not getting better and you're not growing, you're not learning new things, and you should be in rooms where you don't feel like you're the smartest person there, right? Um,
Totally.
but on the other
Totally.
hand, if you're just completely, underwater, and you can't come up for air, and then maybe you've bit off more than you can chew. I guess the question is, like, how, yeah, where different people probably need different pieces of advice here, right?
It's true. I really like. Let's pick apart this one part where you said it was this feeling of deserving. Like, why wouldn't somebody feel like they deserve to be where they are? And we can take it like just through the spectrum of education. We have all these people who graduate high school. We have these people who tend to be overachievers, high achievers in high school, go right into university. They have a similar experience because it's really not all that more challenging for them. They succeed, very well through university. They get their undergraduate degree, apply into the master's. The master's is a hard program to get into, as we were chatting on our first episode, and then all of a sudden they're with these also higher success type folk,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden they maybe don't feel as smart as they once did. I, I'm curious to see how that translates to not just that, the feeling that they don't deserve to be here, because I did witness that with a lot of people, like a lot of colleagues that I had, like they just had this sense that um, despite all of their efforts and their intelligence, and just how remarkable some of these people are, they still don't feel like they should be in physio school. And that
Yeah.
to me always seemed like that hurt me. You know what I mean? To just hear and see, because these people work so hard. Like you and I, we work really, really hard,
Hmm.
and like sacrifice. And you overcome all these barriers, just for an opportunity to be there. And as soon as that opportunity is granted, the fact that that's not met with just utter joy and excitement that's unfortunate. So like, why, like, what is it about the person, you think, that makes them feel that they just don't deserve it?
Yeah, it's such a big question. Yeah, I think it's natural to just feel like there's, oh, like Pete, maybe you're unique and special in a way, and in a negative sense, and that, um, and I don't know, the way other people present themselves. Like, I remember when I was in physio school, like, people just seem so put together. You know what I mean? And
Yep.
in our own experience, maybe we, like, I think people hide the struggle they go through often, like to get to where they end up. And it seems from the outside like other people have such an easy time of it, and that maybe, like, I always kind of felt like against all odds, I got into physio school, and like I never felt growing up
Me
like
too.
academically I was, you know, uh, near the top of my class in high school, or even very well inclined. Like it was just never part of my identity. And then you see these people that are just like absolute, like they're just machines, like, and
Hmm.
it's hard to, I don't know, get, like, I think if your identity is wrapped up in as somebody who isn't, you know, intelligent. Like I always grew up thinking like I was more of a jock, and then you see these people who have just crushed their sciences all the way through, and like they were built for this. So I kind
Hmm.
of always felt like an outsider on one hand. Um, but I think part of it's just immaturity. Like you don't, like you realize when you get to a certain level of success, if you want to call it that, like even just getting into professional school, that everybody kind of has to put in the work, and nobody's all that special, and you're not that special, like, in a positive way or a negative way. And like I think we're all kind of the main character in our life story. So we like to kind of have a chip on our shoulder. I feel like we're different, but maybe at a certain level of experience, you just realize that everybody's the same, and to a large degree.
It's a nice way to put it. And it's kind of freeing once you can realize that. You know what I mean? That you're a lot alike your peers. You know, the similar struggles. It gives you the sense of relatability. Um,
Yeah.
but I like how you said it, because you and I are, I'd take it, quite open books. You know what I mean? Like we're fairly transparent over our past, the struggles that we had to overcome to get to where we are. And I, like you, think that despite all odds, here we are. You know, like I never thought that this is going to be an easy journey. I never thought that I could actually, be a part of this profession. And with that always came a sense of openness. Like I never had to, put myself together and pretended to be somebody I wasn't. Even in physio school, like how you described it, these people, they seem just so well put together. Like they got this. They're, you know what I mean? Like they don't need any
Hmm.
help. But maybe, deep down, and you can see it sometimes. They get, especially around test season, right? Is like you get these people who they just get a bit squirrely, and
Yeah.
they like, and for me, like that, I never had that because I was always openly honest to the fact that holy smokes, I feel like I'm hooped here, guys. Like um
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a
so
healthy way to be, though, like just being open and honest about it. And it shows people around you that they can maybe open up that way as well. And like you don't have to have this veil of superiority and like having it all put together. Like everybody struggles, right?
totally. And so let me ask you this. When you started your actual profession, so you're finished your clinicals, your first day of clinic, like how, on a scale of 1 to 10, let's go back to our scales. How bad did this whole notion of imposter syndrome hit you? Like was it debilitating? Did you feel it every day? Did you feel it once in a while?
Yeah. It was an underlying feeling for me for sure, because so I remember actually, so right after I graduated, I took a trip back out to BC, and like we were actually, I was staying at your place up on the near the lake there, and I had a meeting with the clinic owner over Skype, and he was basically saying, so I'm going to try to take a backseat clinically. I want you to basically be the face of the physio program here, and you're going to run the physio program. And here I am, like I haven't even, I've just finished my clinical placements, just graduated, like I'm gonna be the face of the physio program. Like, what do you mean? Like, I don't know anything, right? It just felt like an absolute imposter. And in some sense, I think, so what did I do, right? I consumed a really unhealthy amount of continuing education. um because I like legitimately every day, every week, if not every day, I was seeing something I didn't know how to manage. And that, like, that feeling has reduced in its frequency, but it's still there. And I think when you start, like every time you see something new, you're seeing it for the first time, right? Like that's a circular statement, but um you got to kind of allow yourself to do the work. Like if you haven't come across somebody with sciatica or cervical radiculopathy or a labral tear, how do you expect yourself to know how to manage it? Like, it's every single time you do it, it's going to be for the first time. And I guess what I tried to do was take every instance where that occurred and never let it happen again, or do the work to be more prepared the following time. And there's no like mental tricks that are going to get you out of that. Like, you just need to learn how to treat a labral tear and learn how to diagnose it and dig into all the literature. And then I would say for me, as I genuinely gained competence, my sense of imposter syndrome faded pretty powerfully. Um, and then I think there's sort of like a transfer there where like you learn how to treat one condition, and you kind of learn principles about how to treat other stuff, so it's not like
Mhm.
you feel like the same degree or same level of imposter. Even when you see something new now, it's like, well, okay, here's how I deal with something new, and it doesn't like ruin your week. You know what I mean? Does
Mhm.
that make sense?
Mhm. No, it's so true. It's so true. And bringing you back to just that one point, you were saying that when your clinic owner was going to have you run the program, you're like, who the hell am I? What do I know? And what's funny is I remember all of that kind of going on last year, and I had this sense that if anybody could do it, it would have been you. You know what I mean? And I think that's one of the things I really admire about you. Just especially just knowing you for these past bloody, how long has it been? It feels like
10
forever.
years.
It is like I got to see that you are far more brilliant, intelligent, and capable than you ever make yourself out to be.
Hmm.
And it's which is I think an awesome quality, because I think that's part of the engine that drives you to keep pushing forward. Like you, just the amount of knowledge that you've accumulated, I don't even know if you realize it, and if there's any problem, like even physio school, undergraduate degree, that would leave me a bit speechless, I would always look at you and you'd always know something to say about it. So it's quite funny,
Well, you're
because
far
I
too
think that
kind, man.
everyone else, but even you look at some of the your reviews on your physio, like from day one, man, you know what I mean? Like, people probably perceived you as this very, very experienced clinician, and just because you were an experienced clinician didn't mean that you didn't hold the intelligence of one. you know
Mm, mm.
you just had to go through the bloody motions, which is really, really cool. And who knows, man, you have such a diverse background in strength and conditioning. You have an absolute passion for the industry, and you've been having that years prior to being an actual physio. And that's probably why you were able to have this success so early on.
Hmm. Well, man, I think I'm blushing here, man. You're gassing me up a little too much for a Saturday morning. I appreciate it though, man. Those are kind words. You know, yeah, I think it's so interesting how our perception of ourselves can be so insanely different from maybe how somebody else perceives us. Like, there are people who I yeah, like there are people who I perceive as just absolute experts, who, when you really get to know them, like they become very human in your eyes, and you realize that, oh, they don't know everything. And um, and then I think, yeah, we can often have these totally backwards perceptions of ourselves. So it's crazy to hear that from you, honestly, because I don't perceive myself as somebody who knows anything above average or has any intelligence that's you know facilitated anything. I just try to do the work, and I guess it is what it
Totally.
is, right? um
And you know what? I'll exploit that problem until you die, so you don't ever leave me, Lee.
Sounds good, man.
Oh
One
man.
one interesting thing that I thought would be worth bringing up is that I think the imposter syndrome comes after this sort of phase of blissful ignorance about,
Mm,
not knowing what you don't know. Um,
yep.
like, I think when I first started in like strength conditioning and personal training, I felt like I knew everything. I wrote a blog post about this just before graduating a couple of years ago, and I we've seen that, like, in the that whole Dunning Kruger effect, right? Which is where people when they start something, they're not aware of their lack of skill, and the people who are least competent tend to most outrageously overestimate their competence. And so I think that what we've been discussing so far is something that you get to kind of once you realize how much you don't know. But there does seem to be this blissful phase where you're just like, man, this is easy, you know?
Yeah.
Do you agree with that? Like, do you think maybe that affects different people to a different extent, or did you have that like when it comes to clinical practice and physio, or did you always feel like you were in the deep end?
It's man, it's interesting because um, I felt that way when I first started university. You know what I mean? Like that I kind of had it figured out. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And then as I learned more, like you were saying, this whole Matthew principle is like the more you know, the less you know, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um, and that really hit me pretty hard after first year of university because I was constantly, like you were saying, in rooms full of people who I thought were just far smarter than I, and I had catch up to do.
Mm.
And I always actually like it, maybe because part and parcel is because I get bored of topics quickly and I'm always changing gears rapidly.
Mm.
So I'm always exploring new things. So I'm always finding myself in the same position of a knowledge transfer from others to myself. And I really like that, right? Because like even what I'm doing now, it's just a huge difference. And I have so much to learn. And I find that quite freeing. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
So I've never really felt like the master in the room.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean,
And
who,
I,
who the hell knows what
sorry.
I would be if I had that opportunity? But
Yeah. No, I mean, I like that feeling though. Like it's interesting. Like I find that sense that I like if I did know it all in an area, like I don't think it would interest me at all. Do you know what I mean? Like
totally, and
when I
it's
started
freeing to
out,
be at the.
sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying it's freeing to be more at the bottom, right? Because the only way to go is up, and that's a hopeful trajectory.
Yeah, yeah, well, no, you're right, and I think this is one of the reasons that I really love being a physio. Um, is it like when you start learning about something, you kind of develop this initial framework. Like take something like something I've dove in really deep on over the past year is like lumbar radiculopathy, radicular pain syndromes, sciatica. And when I started learning about it, it seemed fairly simple. Disc
Mhm.
herniation or stenosis compresses a nerve root, you get inflammation, you get pain down the leg. It is what it is, right? And then I took Tom Jessen's masterclass on Physio Network on sciatica, and then it just like, oh my goodness, like there's so much more depth to it. And then I bought his ebook, and then I did Mark Laslet's course, and you just realize that there's like layers on layers and layers, and even the most basic aspects of assessment and treatment that you thought were relatively straightforward initially, like experts are arguing like crazy about the most basic parts of practice. And I think like I love that about our field is that we're never going to get to a point where there aren't new interesting clinical things to learn and ways to kind of update our knowledge framework. And it's never going to get boring, hopefully.
It's
And I
true.
think a lot of people probably just stop reading research like 5 years in and kind of phone it in. But like I'm going to try to not do that.
No, and you're coming at it in such a way that you're dynamic too, right? Like you're not just settling in one camp. That if that camp was to be disproven, that it would break you. Like
Yeah.
you understand that it's evolving, and then that's okay. And at the end of the day, like we're in a profession where we need to be able to step back and say, hey, like the best argument here wins. Like despite how I've been feeling for my whole clinical past, like if there's research or if there's data to suggest that what I'm doing just isn't right, then I should have nothing but joy to alter my path, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
But I was going to ask you, so you really felt this imposter type syndrome more at the start of your career, which is probably normal for most, right?
Hmm.
But what I want you to talk a little bit about your clinical experience, like from day one, your first clinical experience to the end, and I want you to just like touch on points of independence along the path. Like how independent were you in your clinicals? Did you feel
Hmm.
like they prepared you well for being an actual clinician, or a paid clinician?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. No, that's great. I think it's worth delving into the details. So my first, I think maybe I'll stick with just my MSK, like kind of private practice experience because the hospitals are a totally different ballgame. I was thrown into like an MSK neuro hybrid placement just at the start of my second year. So we hadn't done our advanced MSK training at that point. And
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely felt out of my depth, like in every way. I had great clinical instructors, but man, like things that now seem simple would come in, like a just like a mechanical low back pain or like, a rotator cuff related shoulder pain. I had no idea. Like I was absolutely trembling initially, right? This isn't
Mm-hmm.
even to mention the neuro stuff, which is like a totally different ballgame. Um, so throughout that placement, man, I very much was of the opinion that like, okay, these are paying customers. Like some people here are paying cash, some people are using their benefits. I do not know how to assess this condition. I'm not going to pretend like I know what I'm doing. Like I need to tap in my CI here, and then I'm going
Mm-hmm.
to try to do as much research as I can afterwards, so that this doesn't become a something that I can't do twice. And I think maybe that's a good general rule is like for students that are listening, try to never make the same mistake twice on placement, and
Mm-hmm.
you'll be in really good shape when you come out. But so in that first placement, man, I didn't like. I remember on my last week, there was a a person that came in for an initial eval, and I was like, yeah, sorry, still don't feel comfortable doing a low back assessment, and that was after 6 weeks. And I mean, that's just being honest about it.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe some people are just more comfortable diving in and kind of like figuring out as they go. But for me, it's like I haven't learned like the diagnostic accuracy of any of these tests. I don't know the difference between a slump test and a prone knee bend, and I don't
Mm-hmm.
really know how to like what does it mean if they have a reflex that's 1+ versus 2+, and their myotone's a little like I don't know what that means. Like you're gonna let me tell a client um what needs to happen in terms of management. Like I was so
Yeah.
unqualified for that, right?
Mm-hmm.
um you know
Can I put a pin there for 1 second?
yeah.
Ask you like right now. So you didn't know that. How did you phrase it? You said that you didn't know if you were the person to tell the patient what they need. Do you right now? A year and a bit into your career and all the experience that you have, do you feel like there's a single thing that you could tell a patient to give them what they need to recover?
Yeah, at times for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
So.
100%. I would
Uh,
say I didn't know how to make, like, we're thinking in probabilities, right? So,
yep.
I mean, I think I've gotten quite good at just being honest with patients. Here's what we know based on the
Mhm.
literature.
Yep.
Here's what I know based on my clinical experience. Here's what our possible avenues of treatment are. What do you think? Do you want to
Hmm.
give it a go? And I mean, it was literally like before we did our advanced MSK unit, I didn't know any of the special test clusters. So, maybe this is
No,
just
totally,
more
totally.
more a question of timing. Sorry, it sounded like you had a follow up question.
I'm just going to try to rephrase it in a different way. So,
Yeah.
back your first MSK placement, Leo's thinking that there's this one means to the end. You know what I mean? Like you need to provide the client one path because I'm trying to relate to how I used to feel as like a student physio, and how I always felt was I need to understand, like you just said, every single joint cluster, every single special test, and I need to be able to distill all of these variables into one distinct path forward, right? Because that's
Hmm.
what I felt my job was to take all this information and make a formula to overcome the basically the barrier to recovery, which is this one execution. And that always gave me anxiety because I didn't know how to triage any of that.
Yeah.
But my feeling as it stands now is there's not one road forward. Like I feel like there could be there's many roads forward, and
Yeah.
I that's not always true.
No, it is true. Like you definitely have options and flexibility, but I didn't know how to discriminate between any of the options. And
Totally,
I didn't
totally.
know. Well, okay, there are times you need to be specific, right? Like even just
Hmm.
okay, as a new grad physio, the one thing you need to be able to do is rule out red flags. Like
Yeah.
you need to know how to do that, and when to send somebody to the ER or tell them to go see their GP. um like when are you the right person to do that? And like I didn't know any of that, right? So
Yep.
it's one like if we take those red flag situations out of it, for sure you can just mess around with exercise or manual therapy or whatever, and like you're gonna fumble your way through, definitely. But I mean, maybe more than most, I'm somebody who at least needs like a framework to guide my thinking.
Hmm.
And I didn't have that framework to discriminate between here's one option, here's a second option. What am I going to be able to do here? Like
Yep.
I don't know how to proceed in the absence of that. Like would you say in your case, when you had your first MSK placement, had you learned the majority of like your MSK theory?
No, I was the same as you, my friend. It was we did the basic MSK, like MMTs, range of motion, a few, like a couple special tests, like maybe like meniscal testing, but it wasn't advanced MSK. Like I didn't do any joint glides, PAVMs, PIVMs, like you know what I mean, like the huge joint clusters. So I yeah, I was in the same boat as you. Where I think that my path was slightly different is like because I was in that rural cohort, I was always thrown into these placements where like physios weren't abundant, right? Like,
Yeah.
and I really think this is important for my development because my first placement, it was the first part of, well, was it the second part of first year when I went up to that rural location up by the Queen Charlotte's
Mm-hmm.
on the west coast where it was this hospital, and it was this huge hospital that was a hub for the Northwest. But there was like three physios, and one of the physios was the manager, who also had to like fly to a remote island.
Yeah, I remember
So like
this.
it was super super like just like dire straits, So they really really treated me as a working professional,
Yeah.
and that placement, I think I really attribute that experience to a majority of my growth. I was one scared shitless, two probably grappling with the imposter syndrome the whole time,
Yeah.
researching like I've never researched before, but with such motivation because I knew every time I'd go to clinic the next day, I'd have somebody else in front of me that was just a completely new experience, right? So,
Yeah. And
um,
that right there, I'll just stop you quickly. That's the key when you
yeah,
say researching like never else before. Like, so that's where like I've had two students over the past year, and the the biggest thing that I tell them like is if you see something you don't know, look it up. You got
yep,
Google. Do you know what I mean? You have mentors. You got PubMed. Like I'm sure every single thing you saw there was something that you didn't know how to treat, and you were I remember you reaching out to me and we were chatting about things and you were doing a crazy amount of research, and like I guess at the end of the day you have to take responsibility for that, right? And you did, and you came out of it like in a in a great position. But if you just waited to kind of be spoon fed that material in school, then maybe that wouldn't like you wouldn't have had as much growth. Is that fair?
totally fair, totally fair. So like you said, like you're thrown into the deep end, and really the options are you sink or you swim, and they did it in such a way, and I think like, even thinking about this now, I never really paid much attention to it, but I'm probably going to reach out to my old CI in Prince Rupert because they did a lot of good for me that I actually never even realized until now. It's funny.
Yeah.
Um, but they did it in such a way that it was graded, right? Like it was like you're going to see two new patients a day by yourself.
Yeah.
One's going to be like late afternoon, or sorry, late morning. The next is going to be in late afternoon. It's
Right.
going to give you plenty of time to prepare. Here's their charts, just to
Yeah.
get used to it, right? You just get your feet wet, and then you do all this research, and you see the client, and then you do all this research after, and then you add another one, and then another one, and it's like just this beautiful graded system. And the next part that was really really nice is it wasn't a pay for service, right? All the services in that public outpatient facility is free.
Right.
um,
Yeah.
and my CI was always in the room next door. You know what I mean? Like she wasn't preoccupied doing something else. Like she was, but she always made it evident that if there was anything crazy, just come and see me. So she gave me the freedom to explore, but it was always at a safe distance,
Yeah.
if that makes
And
sense.
that's I mean, I think that's
Um,
the balance that you need, right? You need to feel like you have people you can rely on if you're really out of your depth, but you need to be given enough
totally,
independence that you can actually like make the mistakes you need to make in a safe environment where the consequences aren't life threatening for the patient.
totally, totally. And so that was my experience through all of my placements. Quite frankly, it was like just this incredible amount of independence since day one.
Yeah.
And the reason why I think that the hospital placements are similar to like the MSK, although like the physio is different, like the interaction, the one-on-one interaction is the same. And one thing that I always was, you know, was always really important to me was like, I call it like just user experience. It's kind of funny, but like
Yeah.
just how satisfied is my patient with our interaction? Because if you can't be 100% perfect with your physio execution, like you can at least make sure that they know that you're in their corner, that they have a fantastic experience with you,
Yeah.
they bond with you, they relate with you, um, and in the hospital, like that's how I got through it, because the physio wasn't exciting for me, right? But like
Right.
the people experience was, and that's what kind of gave me my enthusiasm and my motivation. So I really think that the hospitals, although they didn't teach me how to do good MSK diagnostics, I got a lot of repetition with clients, and
Definitely.
just different personality types and just managing
I
expectations. And
mean, but
I think it
having
definitely
said
helped.
that, like that's something that you were already kind of an expert at prior to physio school. So, like, I mean, if anybody could walk into an MSK
Yeah.
practice with zero experience and just like make people
Fake.
feel like they're having a
Totally.
fantastic user experience, it's Brando. Let's be honest here.
Oh
So,
man, yeah, it's true.
um, I,
To do that in a responsible way, hey, look, man, I don't know what's going on, but we can talk about it for the next 30 minutes.
yeah, and that's something that my students have struggled with, and I struggled with at the start. Is when you're seeing something that you don't know, you're thinking about your physio stuff. You're not like doing all that active listening, motivational interviewing stuff. You're thinking about, okay, what questions do I need to ask here to rule out the right things, and like it's such a tricky thing, right, to build that that rapport while also thinking about, okay, what objective test am I going to do next? How do I do this naturally and without seeming robotic? And hey, I mean,
Mhm.
there's no, it's just getting reps, right? That's what I've told my students, is that you're not going to be like this you're not going to take a perfect subjective history the first time. um, you you kind of develop these skills and then they become instinctive, I think, in a sense.
Mhm.
And different
Yep.
people need more help with different aspects of it, but I would say that the building rapport aspect, you're probably in the top 1% of all physio students ever. So um, yeah, I'm curious to ask you, like, over time, when you were going through your placements, like how long did it take you to feel like really comfortable? Or did you find like all through your degree, on all your rotations, you were constantly having to do like a ton of research on your own time? Or was it, was it pretty much you kind of got the hang of things pretty quick?
It's funny because my first placement we just talked about, I did a ton of research because I always felt that there was this one path, right, that I had to isolate and move forward with, or else they wouldn't get better or they could potentially get worse.
Mm,
But as I started to unpack it a little bit, I realized that there are multiple means to most ends, and like at the very least, like well, how about this? Above all else, we're going to do no harm. The hospitals
yeah.
give you a really safe space to execute that. I got a lot of good hospital experience. So, and I knew that at the very least that we could have a fantastic conversation. I could lift these people's spirits up, and we could go to the gym. I could, you know what I mean. And at the very least, we can go on the recumbent bike, and I'm probably not going to do any harm to you,
Yeah.
right? So my anxiety started to lift after knowing that there's a lot of safe exercise executions that aren't going to cause them harm,
Yeah.
right? Obviously, within limits. That I could always revert to, but like you can't tell me that if somebody has, you're usually not going to do wrong with some bad exercises. You know what I mean?
No,
Like
no.
again, your hip precautions, all these types of things. But like
Yeah.
you have these fail safes built in that even if you don't exactly know what's going on, that you can go through a routine while you think, and then you can come back the next day, especially in the hospital, with a better plan moving forward, right? So that
Hmm.
kind of figuring that out, that I could just do heel pumps. You know what I mean? Like and this is the kind of the part where I get a bit frustrated with physio, I think, because
Yeah.
you do all of this groundwork. You went to school for so many years, right? You can understand the pathology down to the perfect physiological explanation, every single mechanism behind why it's happening. But in knowing that, like does your execution change all that much? Like you can only do so much as a physio, I think.
Yeah.
And maybe that's not a fair thing to say, because what we're doing is extremely important. It's
No,
extremely
no, it's
valuable.
it's fair, but the thing is, I think that on the outside it can look really simple, but the amount of
Mhm.
mental processes that are going into giving somebody a squat
It's
actually
incredible.
are like there's a profound amount of considerations there, and I
Totally.
think that like from the outside, it's like, well, yeah, we just bend knees. You know what I mean? We give people exercise and whatever. It doesn't even really matter. Like there's all this data on like non-specific exercise being effective, but
Mhm.
the consideration of pathology and the consideration of how to progress an exercise and the idea of how to cue it and coach it and um, how to frame it in a way that aligns with the person's goals and how many exercises to give somebody and when to make things harder or easier. And like there's a squat isn't just a squat, and a heel pump isn't just like, we're doing valuable work ultimately, I think, even though it can seem simple, which is why I think a lot of people over complicate their interventions because they want to feel like they went to school and they didn't just go to 6 year, like they didn't just do 6 years of higher education to just give somebody an exercise they already knew how to coach beforehand. You know what I mean? But I think there's a lot of ego there, and
Mhm.
and I've definitely come to terms with the fact that simple is often actually harder to do.
It's very hard. It is.
You know what I
You're right.
mean?
Yeah. No, I totally agree.
Yeah.
And like that's the beautiful thing about our profession. And you and I used to talk a lot about the whole notion of service over status, and like that is physio in a sense, right? Because it's so intricate, and there's so much intellect, and there's so much work that goes into it, and I don't think that a majority of the population will ever get to appreciate that,
Yeah.
right? Because, like you said, it's the whole Miyagi house from the outside looking in. Like it doesn't seem like much, but man, as soon as you go to the backyard, it's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a
Um,
lot of depth to it.
it's totally true. So I'm curious to see if there is a correlation between clinical independence and imposter syndrome. Like it's
Yeah. Well,
well,
hey, I'll expand a little bit on my experience. When I got into an MSK clinic and had some competence after doing our like advanced MSK unit, I felt way less imposter syndrome. Like,
totally.
I mean, when I was given independence, my final rotation, my CI kind of threw me to the wolves pretty early on, and it made me struggle through. And as I got better at it, I felt less like an imposter. Like it wasn't all that complicated at the end of the day, you know? Um, so I do think there's a huge correlation.
So how do you have any remedies to offer people? Like, do you ever feel imposter syndrome today? A year and a bit in, do you still grapple with it, or is it kind of a slowly dissipated?
Yeah, I guess a lot less than I used to. But sometimes, sometimes I just find if I'm in like a rough spot mentally, I'll start feeling it. Like sometimes it just has more to do with the filter through which I'm viewing the world. Like I had a bad sleep and I've got a lot of life stress, and I just don't feel like my cognitive operating system is functioning well. Um, I think just like sometimes this might be worth bringing up. Sometimes people just have like clinical anxiety. You know what I mean? Independent of all the
True.
competence and confidence stuff. Like sometimes people just have poor mental health, and that like if you've been doing it for a long time and you still feel that way, like could just be that, yeah, like you're like it'd be worth talking to like a professional about it. And maybe I think that's something that's worth mentioning. But I think everybody has a slightly different experience with it. um, yeah, like is it something that you feel a lot, or have you pretty much let it go?
No, I do feel I don't feel it as much with patients anymore, but I feel it when I listen to like some of the higher level podcasts and like, even just like the continuing ed courses, or even if I went back at some of my physio notes and I think, holy smokes, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
there's just so much that I actually don't know that it can get overwhelming. You get it when you talk to people who are just like you said, ultra intelligent, or even a perceived master at their craft. But I was just even talking to our other colleague Galen there about it the other day, and he says, he follows this. It was a vestibular physio who was supposed to be like just the top in his class,
Hmm.
of vestibular research, of education, and of clinical practice,
Hmm.
and he did some courses through them. Thought there was really, he was the guy. He's got the formula. And then, he took another course with a similar uh, a similar fellow who had kind of the same class distinction, was just this master of his craft, knows everything there ever would need to know about vestibular rehab, and his approach was completely different and disputed all of it, of his first course. And it's like there you kind of have it, right? Like it's two people who are supposed to be both like class A, know what they're talking about. Any vestibular issue, send them their way, but
Yeah.
they're completely contradictory to one another. And
Yeah.
it's just ironic, and it comes back to the point, like, we're all figuring it out slowly,
Totally.
um, and there are multiple paths.
And maybe that's just a good reminder that it's, if you do feel that imposter syndrome, that's totally normal. And,
Yeah.
like, it's such a like, physio specifically is such a mess, the research and like the different opinions that experts have. So like, how are you
Mm-hmm.
supposed to have it figured out and have a clear framework? Um, and then just, yeah, generally, I think it's maybe worth, it's good to recognize that you're not alone and everybody feels this to some extent. You know what I mean?
It's true. It is true, and it's tough, because you learn so much about different aspects and different pathologies, and like you feel like you finally overcome kind of that knowledge barrier. You get comfortable with something, and then because you're comfortable with it, you stop paying as much attention to it, you stop researching it as much, and you go pay attention to something else. And then for me, it's like I usually forget probably about half of my previous knowledge. So it was funny,
Yeah.
is I really enjoy doing hips and knees because they're very, very straightforward. You get to have a lot of fun with them.
Yeah.
And you kind of know what's going on. But what's funny is this guy came with a question to me the other day, was, the knee clunks a little bit, right? It oscillates side to side and it makes a bit of a clunking sound. He goes, will this ever go away? And I thought about that, and I had a really strong gut urge to say, oh, absolutely. Oh, we're going to, strengthen the muscles across the knee. We're going to, the hip, the knee, every good knee program has a hip program,
Yeah.
and I was just going to spew this knowledge. And I thought, will it ever stop clunking? Like I actually, and he goes, why is it clunking? And it's like, well, my theory would be, you have this brand new metal, in your joint capsule, and they just kind of clunk together between that little plastic plate. But do I actually know that? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, trying to be really honest with people is hard, and that's where I start. Again, total knees are very straightforward. They're
Right.
very basic, right? We should have. I feel like I should know every answer that would ever come my way from a total knee replacement.
Right.
Or why won't my knee bend to 130 degrees? What's stopping it? It feels like a block. Like,
Yeah.
and I remember asking a lot of different surgeons that question too, and it's like, do you ever actually know exactly what's going on? And like, the
No.
answer is no,
Yeah. 100% no.
but they're still looking at you for some sort of rhyme or reason and reassurance. And so I get these little waves of imposter syndrome, especially it's frustrating for me too, because especially when it's something as simple as a total knee replacement,
Yeah.
and
Well,
I think, oh my God.
that's an important point though, is that I think being honest is a good remedy for imposter syndrome. Like realizing you don't have to have all the answers, and
Mm-hmm.
just being transparent with your patients. Um, for example, like yesterday I had a patient come in who'd been in a car accident. She had probably like what I would classify as grade 2 whiplash, and a concussion. And that's not an area of expertise of mine. Like that's a big blind spot. I just haven't done a lot of that. Haven't really done any vestibular. And so I just said, hey, I'm going to refer you to my colleague who's done some extra training in concussion rehab. Um, Here's what I know about it and how you should manage it in the acute phases. But I'll put you in with this other physio on Tuesday. And I didn't see that as this big slight to my ego, or like I kind of had to like fake this answer because I had like one lecture on it in school. You know what I mean? I
Totally.
think you don't have to be all things to all people. And
Mm-hmm.
if you don't have competence in an area, it's not like, oh, I'm an imposter. Like you get all red in the face.
Yeah.
You just say like, well, I don't know much about that. So here's what I do know. What do you think? Do you want to go forward with this, or would you? I mean, maybe it's better to refer you on, right? Like, and I think just, man, it's funny how these principles from life totally apply to rehab. Like, just be honest with people. Don't lie to
Yep.
people. That's generally a good
Yep.
idea in clinical practice. um and it kind of takes your ego out of it, right? Like on one hand you have arrogance and that egotistical nature about your ability, and that, oh, that comes across so horribly. But this kind of insecurity is also rooted in ego. It's this kind of a self-focused attitude, right? Whereas if you just take yourself out of the equation and it's just, well, here's a person in front of me. Do I know how to help them? Yes or no? You just go down your decision. You kind of go through your clinical process, focus on the process. It's not about you. Learn to be objective in kind of appraising your abilities. And when you don't think you can be objective, because we're all very biased, then have people in your life that can, shed some light on your blind spots, and you're good to
Mm.
go, you know?
I love that. I love that. Yeah, it's not all about you. Yeah, don't make it about yourself. And like I said, leaving your clinician's ego at the door is really, really important.
Yeah.
And I've always had an easy way of doing that because I've never really, and rightfully so, because how fresh am I to this profession? But I've never really felt like I've had an ego with physio, or even most things in my life, which is good. And maybe it's just because I can really realize what I don't know, and for me that's more exciting than anything. Is like there's just all this potential to learn, and I
Yeah.
like that far more than knowing. And I'm a bit of a jack of all trades type guy, just from my background, and I really enjoy that diversity. But I'll ask you one thing, because you have this intellectual conversation, this honest conversation with the client, saying like, look, like I'm not the best with concussion rehab or vestibular rehab, but my colleague is,
Hmm.
and I'd love to refer you on, and that's that's a totally respectable, open, honest, and professional thing to do. I was talking to my dad about this actually when I think I was in Prince Rupert, or I can't remember where I was, but it was again a rural spot where there's not a lot of healthcare.
Hmm.
And I was just telling him like I don't think I'm the right person to be seeing these people. And he proposed the question like, if you weren't seeing them, would anybody? Like are you
Yeah.
as limited as you are in your knowledge? Are you the best shot that they have?
Yeah. And if,
And I
if
thought
you
about that, like,
are, if you are, then yeah, you better buck up and learn some stuff about concussion, Lee. But thankfully I got my buddy Adrian, who's like an expert in concussion. So, and he works at the clinic.
did he
So
did he do the what
he
concussion
did
course
the
did he do?
complete concussion management course. Took him
Nice.
like
I had a
three
friend who just did
months.
that.
Like, it's a heavy, thick course, but
It's quite expensive, isn't it?
yeah, no, I think his clinic funded it. So his other one. So,
That's awesome.
but I say that's the thing, right? Like I have a buddy who practices up in Thunder Bay. Shout out Nate DeFranco, and
Mhm.
he says like, man, the things he sees, he's basically like a family doc up there as a physio,
Totally.
making
And
referrals to
you see that.
neurologists, and like me in my
Wow.
kind of cushy practice and Etobicoke in Toronto, like I don't really see that like really intense medical stuff that much. Like I don't get thrust outside of my zone of competence and expertise all that often. And when I do, there's typically somebody within a 5 mile radius who I can refer them to.
That's so. Yeah, no, totally. You should tell old Nate Dog there that there's Ice Physio is doing.
Nate Dog. Oh.
That's a rapper, I think. Ice Physio is doing a primary care physical therapist course that basically, it gives you a quick introductory to basically family medicine, to screen out and to help rule out pathologies and refer on it. And it's for like more rural type physios. So,
Oh wow, cool.
yeah, pretty cool. Pretty
Yeah,
cool.
interesting.
So the remedy, I suppose, that I think for this whole imposter syndrome is like just like be excited for the amount that you don't feel, like use it as fuel to learn.
Right.
It's easier said than done. You know what I mean? Like you'd never tell somebody who has anxiety not to be anxious. Like, what are you being anxious about? But at the
Yeah.
same time, it's like just surrender to it, because we're all feeling it.
Yeah, no, and easier said than done, right? And like some people are going to need to address anxiety with a therapist or through medication, but some people are also just going to need to realize that it's not about them, and do a little bit of work, and then they'll feel better. So
Totally.
yeah, I think everybody's going to have a totally. It's hard to make a blanket statement about it, but I think that that pretty much sums it up as you put it there.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Anything else you want to add, Brando, on imposter syndrome, or have we beat this horse to death?
I feel pretty good about it. How about you?
Yeah, no, I'm good, man.
Awesome.
Well, we'll leave it there, and I'll hopefully I'll talk to you soon.
Take care, my friend.
Okay, bye-bye. Thank you so much for listening to the Paradox PT podcast. If you have any comments or feedback, the best way to get in touch with us is on Instagram. Brandon can be found at Pacific Edge Physio, and I can be found at leo.physio. We'd also really appreciate it if you gave us a follow and a like on whatever podcast app you use so you can get notified about future episodes as we release them. Once again, thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.